Good afternoon. I'm Ravi Dhar, professor in the area of marketing. I'm delighted to have today Antonio Lucio here, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Visa. He's going to be speaking at a conference. I thought I'll take the opportunity to ask him a few questions on marketing in general and specifically some of the things that Visa is doing. Hi, Antonio. I want to start by asking you, before you took the job as Chief Marketing Officer at Visa, you spent your extensive marketing career in many CPG companies, Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, and others. So sort of a first question was just how do you see the similarities and differences in marketing for financial services and the CPG world in which you lived before?
It's easier to start with the differences. First and foremost, in our business at Visa in financial services, we spend as much time doing business-to-business marketing as the amount of time that we do business to consumer, which is dramatically different than what you do at consumer goods companies, where most of your efforts go to understanding the needs of that ultimate consumer. The second one is because of the industry in which we play in, which traditionally have not been marketing driven, accountability and return on investment becomes essential. So as I began my transformation from consumer goods into the financial services world, one of the most important things that I had to do was to even change my language. I had to learn the language of the financial services world, and I had to speak P&L driven marketing at all times. To the extent that a marketer is able to demonstrate the link between activities and transactions, which is our business, that marketer is going to be successful. The third was as I began my journey into the financial service world, I also understood that what the industry understands as marketing sometimes is actually more of marketing communications. That the discipline of consumer understanding, P&L management resides in other type of departments. I had to, over the last 2 years, undergo a major and radical cultural transformation with my people to actually begin that consumer-centric journey, customer-centric journey, all database, all return on investment focus, to actually begin to co-lead the agenda within the structure of the company today, which again is very different than the type of approach that I followed in the consumer goods world. Ultimately, where we would be headed as a marketing organization, we would have that consumer centricity that consumer goods companies have, add on top of that customer centricity, but with a deeper level of rigor in terms of return on investment discipline, and because of the business in which we are in, a deeper level of understanding of consumer behavior, because we see those transactions.
The skepticism is higher in some sense. The justification of marketing returns becomes much more paramount, whereas perhaps in CPG it was taken for granted that marketing adds value, and so you didn't have to ironically, you don't have to justify often marketing expenditures as much, it seems like. Yeah.
That is the case in technology companies, and Visa is first and foremost a technology companies. We are a network. The same holds true for most of the companies that I speak to around the Bay Area, and all of them are there, Google and Facebook and Twitter and all that. They're technology driven, so it's almost if it works, they will come. We're changing that to ensure that as we move forward, given the level of innovation that our category will require to maintain its level of growth, that marketing not only has a seat at the table, but importantly begins to co-drive the agenda.
What are some of the lessons, a few key lessons in terms of building a brand and sustaining it, and perhaps also what are some of the common maybe misconceptions or mistakes managers often make about branding?
Well, the first and most important aspect of building a brand is to have a deep understanding of what the brand stands for, in terms of its long-term vision, in terms of its rational components, and its emotional payouts. So have that level of clarity is critical. Number two is about consistency of purpose, maintaining that level of integrity across all dimensions of the marketing mix on a consistent basis, and importantly also maintaining that level of support on an ongoing basis. The third piece is constant rejuvenation. Brands that stay for a long time required constant innovation to be meeting or anticipating consumer needs within their space, and in the process re-inject themselves with renewed energy. When I looked at the mistakes that I have made and I have seen other marketers make, is they always have to do with those three. Either there is not a thorough understanding of what the brand stands for, or there has not been consistency on messaging or consistency of support. And the third, which is perhaps the most important one, there has not been a level of constant rejuvenation to maintain that brand more vibrant than ever. When I talk about the innovation and rejuvenation side of it, I am not only talking about the product side of the equation. I am also talking about the engagement, consumer engagement part of the innovation, which means that brands today need to anticipate and meet consumer engagement needs within the context of where the audiences are today.
Any examples, maybe outside Visa, of brands that have done well in terms of the principles you laid out that you like? Yeah,
I think that the brand that exemplifies both the positive and the negative of what it is to manage a brand consistently over time, and what happens when those brands get out of that journey, is brand Coke. When they maintain a level of consistency of brand identity, level of consistency in support around the world, and breakthrough innovation both on the product side as well as the consumer engagement side, they've done remarkably well. When they've diverted from that path, they haven't. I happen to think that they're in a very good path today. The obvious ones, I love the Mini Cooper brand. I mean, talk about a brand that understands deeply its DNA, what it stands for. It has maintained a very rigorous level of consistency in messaging and support, and it is constantly innovating, not only in the design of the cars, but in the way that they engage with the consumers. I am a Mini Cooper driver. I have been now for 2 years, and I have to say that it, from a consumer experience standpoint, is one of the most satisfying consumer experience, not only when I'm driving the car, but also the level of engagement that I have with that brand, even at the service center. So those, again, the other obvious ones everybody knows, and I shouldn't comment on, like Apple, etc.
Look at sort of the communication mix that Visa has. Sports sponsorship seems to be a key element of your communications mix, including obviously the Olympics, both the winter and summer. Enjoyed watching the basketball game in China with you, and now the World Cup soccer. So tell me a little bit about why is sports sponsorship seen as an important, relevant element of your communication mix, and secondly, given the large amount of dollars spent, give us a sense of what are the benefits that you get from these things. Yeah.
Well, I wish I could claim credit for the acquisition of any of these properties. I was lucky enough to inherit them. In the case of the Olympics, when the Olympics were obtained, they were an extension of the brand promise of ubiquitous acceptance everywhere you want to be. As time evolved, the Olympics became to play two important aspects in our brand engagement dimension, both business to business as well as business to consumers. First and foremost, what the Olympics do is give us the opportunity through our banks to leverage the asset against those priorities that the bank may have in a given country. So through the utilization of the Olympic rings and messaging, they can go for acquisition, they can go for retention, they can go for increased usage. Part of our deal is that we extend those rights to our bank customers. That's how we get revenues, that's how we get transactions. The second part of it is equity. Because with the Olympics, we've been doing that now for 22 years, we have enough data that actually correlates the level of impact that the asset has on equity, even at the same level of messaging. And what we've been able to prove over the years is that the same messaging, one carrying the property and another one not carrying the property, has a higher level of recall, has a higher level of branded recall, and whether it is digital or traditional, and importantly, it has a higher lift on brand equity. I did have the opportunity to work on the renewal of the Olympics, and I have to tell you that since Visa became a public company, the level of rigor on returns on investment exponentially grew. So I actually had to take the property not only to our management, but given the multi-year commitment to our board of directors. And in order to do that, we actually had to build a very thorough business case on return on investment. And again, on the top line basis, we've been able, because we've been doing it for a long time through Accenture modeling, to actually identify the revenues associated with the property. We also have all the costs associated there, and I have to say that overall, and by key country, we've been able to deliver positive returns. On the return side, on the equity side, we've been able to, in every single country that we leverage the Olympics, we were able to see significant lift in brand equity gaps versus our key competitors. I don't have the history yet, Ravi, on the FIFA World Cup. All I can tell you is that the same level of rigor that we've applied to the Olympics, we're going to have to apply for FIFA. And if it doesn't pay out, we will give it up.
It's interesting. And so let me talk a little bit more about the consumer side of communication, the B2C part. And so clearly one of the big things you notice is that the media is getting fragmented based on the media consumption habit of consumers. So what challenges or what are the different ways in which Visa is now trying to connect to consumers given the fragmented landscape out there for media?
Well, we're doing two things. First and foremost, we transform the creative development process. Because the media equation, or I should say the audience equation, is so critical, given the level of fragmentation, we've decided to go media first. What that means is thorough understanding of the consumer as consumer in terms of his behavioral patterns and his road or her road to transaction, but then the utilization, understanding the utilization of media by that particular consumer in its path to transaction. By doing that, we create a media strategy and plan first, and then we give this to the creative department to actually create against that. I have to say, Ravi, being very honest about it, that the creation of the model and the creation of the engagement model in a multitasking world, we're sort of feeling our way into it, because the biggest challenge that as marketers we are facing is the fragmentation of the data. So we have different KPIs and we have different tools and different methodologies to measure all the different impacts across the multiple media options that we have. That data and those tools don't speak to each other to the point that I could say, you know, the relative impact of social media is this versus search versus the YouTube experience versus TV. We don't have that, and that's an issue that we're going to have to crack as an industry, and hopefully with the help of the academic world. But as far as consumer engagement, we are doing media first, as I mentioned. The second one is the understanding of awareness, conversation, communication, and transaction. In other words, we assume and we take for given that the consumer will be multitasking. So we've assigned the role of high impact awareness and invitation to action to the TV. We've assigned the role of conversation and consideration to social media. And we've assigned the transaction role to links to e-commerce site that consumers can get either through social media or through other means. Again, we're experimenting with the model. We don't know if we have the right answers yet, but I think we're into something in terms of understanding consumer as audience, as important as understanding the consumer as consumer, and on the other front, taking for granted multitasking as a model and assigning a different role to each one of the media alternatives in a way that they could work with each other. Again, we don't have the tools to measure whether we are successful or not, but it's something we're definitely experimenting with.
So it's almost like looking at sort of the consumer's decision journey, if you like, from the time of need is triggered to transaction and whatever the media consumption might be along that journey. And the complication is obviously the interaction between these different media in some sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So hopefully you will help us figure this one out.
I'll be happy to learn more about it first before we can figure it out. I wanted to ask you a little bit, obviously in your industry there's a lot of innovation happening in terms of payment mechanisms, particularly by technology companies, which wasn't there as much 10 years ago. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about what's the role of innovation and your role as a CMO. How do the different groups work together to think about new ideas, whether it's acquisition, whether it's homegrown? What exactly is the role of marketing in that?
Again, it's a role that it is evolving. Being a technology-centric organization, as we have traditionally been, the innovation approach, by the way, as most technology companies today, has been technology out. What we are trying to bring into the picture, and we have very specific examples now to show, is marketing should bring consumer in points of view. The product development group should bring technology out, and out of that tension and discussion, breakthrough ideas will happen. The way that we've done that is by enlisting partners like IDEO that through their design principle approach, which combines anthropology with product design, has helped us transform the product development approach by bringing the consumer into the center of the equation first. Again, it is a process, it is a journey. We have not done that consistently across all the dimensions of our innovation journey, but that is the vision. Consumer in marketing, technology out, product development. The second aspect of innovation that you get, and believe me, I've never been as paranoid about innovation as I have become since I moved to San Francisco. The technology world, whether it is in payment industry or data management or consumer engagement, is in every single corner of that small place. What we are coming to terms with as a company is the fact that, like many other companies have done, the realization that we will not be able to come up with every single idea in the payment world that we would be able to leverage through our scale. So what you're seeing us doing is significantly more external orientation for development that will take us through either co-creation with consumers, co-creation with developers, or a significantly higher role for acquisitions, which we could not do before because we were not a publicly traded company, to help us narrow the technological gaps that we will need in the areas that we need to take the business forward. An example of that is the announcement of our CyberSource acquisition that will help us step change our ability to compete in the e-commerce world.
Do you think the skill set that a successful marketer needs has changed compared to when you started out your career in marketing, or do you think the fundamentals are pretty much the same, or do you feel that certain capabilities have become more important over the years?
I think some have remained the same but amplified, like analytical rigor. The amount of access to information that we have today is nowhere close the access to information that we had when I started 29 years ago. So having people that are analytical by nature, that feel totally comfortable with numbers, but at the same time are able to transcend the number to paint the traditional brand picture is mandatory. Second is global orientation. Right now in the world, two things are happening at the same time. There are pressures towards globalization, internet, affluent marketing, cross-border transactions, and there are forces that move towards localization, decoupling of the economic, rise of nationalism, so on and so forth. Having people that are able to look at the world with that frame of mind, understanding that you're going to need both and are capable of tackling the complex question that is, how do I deliver local relevance while maintaining the integrity of a global brand, is also critical, which we didn't have when I started. The third one is teamwork and leading by influencing. The world has changed from the command and control days. You either lead by influence regardless of organizational and hierarchical structures, or you're going to be left behind, and the organization will end up rejecting you. So the ability to work in teams, not only as leader of a team, but as an active participant in a team, is more important than ever. And then the last two is digital savvy and curiosity, which we didn't have at the time because of the world, the way that the world is changing. And finally, which I think the last 2 years have demonstrated, resilience is it. People that are able to manage adversity, that are able to make mistakes and pick themselves up frequently, are the types of people that we need in the marketing world and that we need in the business world today.
Great. On the last note, I want to ask you spent some time over the years in the Yale University system and School of Management, giving talks, coming back. Any sense do you have developed over the years, like about Yale as a business school? What seems to be sort of its DNA or associations of brand in terms of the type of students that we might have?
I've seen the school evolved over the last couple of years. The things that have remained consistent has been, it's almost a exclusive boutique school. It's small, it's incredibly selective, and it's incredibly rigorous in its approach to hardcore analysis and business. That, I think, is the cornerstone of the DNA as I see it. The evolution has been towards true interdisciplinary approach. Interdisciplinary not only within the business world, but beyond. The whole notions of allowing students to interact and cooperate with other schools within the system in the solution of big, complex problems is something that a lot of people talk about. I've seen it at Yale alive well, and I think could become a very significant point of difference, particularly as the university begin to tackle more global problems of business.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.